welcome everyone to the latest installment of our Radical Diversity discussion series, this time hosted by the Goethe-Institut, Washington, DC. My name is Lena Kuhnt, and I'm the Cultural Programs Curator of the Goethe-Institut here in Washington. The Radical Diversity series is presented by several Goethe-Institut locations throughout North America in collaboration with the Goethe Pop-Ups, the Thomas Mann House in Los Angeles, and under the sponsorship of the Heinrich Böll Stiftung North America. Since August 2020, so about 7 months ago, we had 6 installments. We started in Los Angeles and then went to Houston, Seattle, Mexico City, Montreal, and Boston. So this is the 7th installment, and I'm very excited about it. Before we start, maybe some house rules. If you have a question, please post the question in the Q&A button below anytime throughout the event. We have time to answer some questions after the discussion around 1 p.m. Also, I want to point out that this discussion is translated simultaneously into Spanish. So please choose your language accordingly, either English or Spanish. You see a little globe icon at the bottom of your screen, so you can choose your language. Of course, I also want to introduce you to our 2 moderators, Mohamed Amjahid and Max Czollek. So Mohamed Amjahid is freelance journalist and author. Anthropologically and journalistically, he focuses on human rights, equality, and upheaval in the United States, in Europe, in the Middle East, and in North Africa. Structural and everyday racism, as well as white privileges, are topics Mohamed discusses in his books, such as Among Whites, What It Means to Be Privileged, as well as in his new book, which I believe will be published in March this year, which I'm very excited about. It's called Der weiße Fleck, The White Stain. Max Czollek is also an essayist. He completed his doctorate studies at the Center for Research on Antisemitism at the Technical University in Berlin. His publication Desintegriert euch, Disintegrate, critically reflects on Germany's demand for integration into dominant culture and was widely discussed in Germany in 2018. His newest publication, Gegenwartsbewältigung, Coping with Past, was published in August 2020. Max and Mohamed, I'm so delighted to have both of you here. Thank you.
Hello from Berlin. We're sitting here in late night Berlin. Hello to everyone from Germany and the US and everywhere else you're zooming in. This is the 7th edition coming to you since September. We've been doing this cooperation. Really happy we're still doing this. And right afterwards, there's going to be a recording of that online. And now I'm passing this on to my great, wonderful co-moderator, Mohamed, who's going to introduce our today's guest. Mohamed.
Stop it, Max. Stop it. Thank you so much. And I'm so happy to see you all. Let me introduce Dr. Imani Woody very quickly. Our other guest, Ruby Corrado, by the way, couldn't make it today. So I'm happy and looking forward to spend more time with Dr. Imani Woody. She has been an advocate of women, people of color, and LGBTQI+ for more than 25 years. She has served on the board of directors of the Mautner Project for Lesbians, Women in the Life Association, Whitman Walker Lesbian Services, and is the former chair of SAGE Metro DC. Dr. Woody was appointed commissioner by former DC Mayor Vincent Gray and DC Mayor Muriel Bowser to the Office of LGBTQ Affairs. She was recently appointed commissioner by Mayor Bowser to serve on the Global Age-Friendly Task Force. Dr. Imani Woody is a nationally recognized subject matter expert on inclusion and diversity, specializing in the field of aging and LGBTQ SGL elder issues. And Dr. Woody is president and CEO of Mary's House in Washington, D.C. A warm welcome, Dr. Imani. I'm so happy to have you here with us. And maybe at the beginning, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Mary's House. What is the purpose of this project? Why did you worked so hard for so long to provide this service in Washington, D.C.
Thanks, Mohamed, for that warm welcome. Max, I'm glad to be here with you as well. This is so exciting. And you're bringing me to talk about my favorite topic, Mary's House for Older Adults. All right, so I started this program. My pop was ill. My dad was ill and needed to go to a rehab center or a nursing home. And my pop was a middle-class guy. He had a couple of properties, he had insurance, he had good insurance actually, so we could pick a good place for him to live. He was a pillar in the community, did lots of community work, mentored to young men, young Black men. And so we picked a nursing home in Northwest DC. If you know Northwest DC, was in one of the better quadrants of the city. And the people liked him there. But to them, he was room 202, not Reverend Brady Woody, not a pillar in his community. He was a bed. It wasn't because they didn't like him, but that is just the culture of how we care for old people often in our country, in the United States. And so it ended up, and he had advocates. I believe everyone should have an advocate, whether you're young and old or old. And my dad had me, had my wife, he had his adult grandchildren. He had friends who would come and check on him. However, he went incontinent and he came out incontinent. Actually, we pulled him out so that he would live his last days at home among people who loved him. And so he died, and he left me this house that I grew up in Washington, D.C. Trying to figure out what to do with it, I learned that a colleague had died. And this was a white guy, Jewish guy, actually, who was lived in one of the upscale suburbs in a retirement facility in one of the retirement residence in one of the upscale suburbs, and he died. He was found 5 days later after being dead. So he was found, he died, and 5 days later, someone recognized that he was dead. And I found that appalling, but it served to show how social isolation doesn't have any regard for age or for wealth or for socioeconomic status or for race. Social isolation can happen, and it happened to this gentleman. And so we decided to build a house, Mary's House for Older Adults. Mary's the name of my mom. She was a great educator and a great advocate and activist. So we're calling it Mary's House for Older Adults. And it's an LGBT-friendly residence. And we're really trying to think about that name, friendly, because it is a welcoming and affirming residence so it goes beyond friendly, right? To provide safe environments and to provide a communal environment, because our guy who lived in an upscale suburb, he was living in a great environment, but it wasn't communal, right? You know, he probably had stopped playing chess or bridge or spades. He probably had stopped going to synagogue, probably stopped driving, right? And so he became more isolated. I don't know about you sometimes. I'm an introvert. People don't believe it, but I am. I'm an introvert, and I don't have to call folks, right? And so can you imagine just being older, you stop calling people stop calling you, right? I've called him 4 times. He doesn't want to go to the movies. I'm not calling him anymore. And so one of the things that we're doing with Mary's House that is going to be communal. And so there's going to be a person that can look you, as my mom would say, in your eyes every day to see how you are. So there's going to be someone that says, "Hi, Mr. Max. Hi, Mr. Mohamed. How are you doing today?" Doesn't mean that you have to come out of one of the 15 rooms that we have that has its own a little mini kitchen and its own bathroom and own setting room. It's a studio. But it does mean that we have to look at you and we're building family with you. And so that's the story of Mary's House for Older Adults. So, and and so the good thing is that we had to raise, the thing is that we had to raise money for it because not rich or a developer. It's too small. It's 15 units. It's not going to make anybody any money. So nobody really, if you're not making money in a capitalist society, what are you doing? And so it's been a hard road to row, but the city is giving us $1.5 million for construction costs. And we have friends and people who just support us. So we do this aging, we're building communal environments that are more than welcoming. And we also are doing cultural competency training because we know we can't build ourselves out of this, right? We can't build enough places. And that means that the places that are already here, like the place my pop was in, that we go in there and teach cultural competency, not only about LGBTQ, SGL, and SGL, the same gender loving, not only building that cultural competency, but cultural competency around aging. Do you know how ageism just thrives in nursing homes? Can you imagine that? So we set time to train and teach other folks through our programming. And so if your folks want to learn more, they can go to www.maryshousedc.org.
Great, Dr. Imani, thank you so much. Maybe we include that web address already in the chat so people can copy that. Lena, maybe you can just insert that. There's a lot of things I would like to unpack, or maybe just follow down on, or kind of dive into a bit more. And that'd be, this is actually the first, probably the first time that we focus in this series on radical diversity, on the topic of ageism. And I like the fact that we are all already, by focusing, we're connecting it in an intersexual awareness with the topic of LGBTQ plus and SGL. Because I think that is really what radical diversity is all about, to try to kind of meet up with the complexity of discrimination and of the things we can actually do against those processes of discrimination. But trying to get closer to that and to those strategies which you're an expert for. I just hit this term SGL, which I didn't know. So I did my research before, but I don't expect everyone in the audience to know. So maybe you just give a short idea of what SGL means and what it stands for, and then we kind of continue from there.
Sure, I'd love to. So SGL was coined in the, I want to say 80s, but it could have been 90s, for African-American LGBTQ, not Q wasn't there yet, but LGBT folks who did not feel connected to the European lesbian, lesbo, sappho, and the word gay was really an insult. Being called a lesbian and being called a gay person in an at that time in the African-American community was worse than the N-word, right? Because you could use that word. And so folks were trying to figure out, or folks were using same gender loving, and we were using it. And so it's the generation just a little bit before mine who was using it. And so I use it because I want folks from that generation to know that I see them. I see you, old Black person, right? I just had a conversation with some folks. I was in a meeting earlier this week, and someone said to me, well, Dr. Imani, the only time I hear someone use SGL is when I talk to you. I don't hear it. And I said, but that's okay. That's okay. I said, it's sort of like we're now saying BIPOC for Black, indigenous, and people of color. We just don't say people of color because that default often left out Black people. And so when I say SGL, especially if I'm in a group talking about aging, I want the Black people, the Black old people, to know that I see them. It's sort of like when we use in the LGBTQ community, LGBTQ SGL community, and we use the pronoun, someone wants to use the pronoun they, I don't have that. That doesn't come up in my conversation or with my general circle of friends. However, if a person says their pronouns are they, I am going to recognize that. And I am going to make that an option so that person knows that I see they. I see them, right?
Yeah.
So that's the short answer, Max.
It's so inspiring just to listen to you, Dr. Imani. And while you were talking about the project, I was really reminded or thinking of the concept of the chosen family that is widespread in queer communities. Of course, as a queer person of color myself, when you talk about the queer phobia within the African American community, it reminds me also of a lot of discourses in other minorities which are affected by source of discrimination or racism, but that doesn't make them free of queer phobia, for example. So how much of this concept of chosen family is in your work, actually? Also, when you talk about your peers, for example, you say they are like older LGBTQ, SGL identifying people. How did this concept also change with time, and what's the role today when you greet all those 15 lovely peoples in the house?
So there are a couple of questions there, Mohamed. Let me see if I can do justice. So I believe in communal living and communal life. We all, as human beings, that's what we want, right? We want family. We need other human beings. And the history of LGBTQ people, LGBTQ SGL people, LGBTQ plus people, there is a history of, at least the United States, of it being against the law and being against God. Those two things, right? And so people would go back in the closet and not, even now, we find people coming out in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Can you imagine living your whole life as not your full self, not able to bring your whole self to the table? That is unimaginable to me. So part of this process of creating Mary's house is part of the environment to create spaces that are safe, wonderful, quality spaces for this population. And I won't use the word minority because I try to use what I'm talking about, because people of color are not a minority anywhere. So we're the majority. So if I'm trying to talk about Black folks, that's what I say. But LGBTQ people during the AIDS epidemic in particular, there's a friend that said, he's now a friend, he was a client, but he said, I lost 100 friends during the pandemic. I have no one who is my peer to talk to. I have new friends, but they don't know the old me. That is just poignant, right? But what do you do about that? So we try to create family, and Black folks have always tried to create family. When they're family, you have an extended family. There's a way of folks were talking when I was growing up as a young person. Any adult that was close to my family, we called them auntie, the adult auntie or uncle, because they were too close to call Mr. or Ms. or Mrs., but you had to put a title in front of their name. I could not just come up to an adult and say, hey, Max, whoa. You do something, right? You have to do something. And so some of that has lingered with me. So I asked people to call me if they were professional in a professional environment to say Dr. Woody or Dr. Imani, so that I can have that. And an aside, as being a Black woman, you need everything. You just can't walk in the room as a Black older woman. And so that was an aside. I don't know whether I answered your question or not.
It did, actually. It did. Maybe Dr. Max wants to add something.
Dr.
Yes,
Max
Dr.
wants
Max.
to ask Dr. Imani about... No, actually, there was one question about the actual research standing behind the doctor, which you carry, which I happen, like, I used to do a PhD before as well, and I still find myself wondering about how this scientific work relates to my activist and artistic work, because I do feel somehow it does very strongly, and at the same time I feel relieved not to be solely within the sphere of academia anymore, because I feel like also it was very restrictive and very limited to specific things. So how do you see, because I saw you're also doing a PhD in human services, which I found a bit hard to translate to a German context. So maybe how do you relate? Is that like your communal work and your activist practice to your PhD and scientific work?
Absolutely. I think so. Human services is one of the younger disciplines. It's a cross between human resources, perhaps, and social work. That's how I see it. And I was in the school of leadership, so all that, and nonprofit management was my specialty. So that was the cherry on top. But being in academia is, for me, it's really an uphill climb. It's like, I'm pushing that glass ceiling all the time, and I'm old. I just, and so I don't try to push it. I go this way. And that's how my communal work does. My research, my study, my scholarly work is left to right as opposed to trying to go up. And, they say when the tide rises, all boats float. So that's how I plan to get to the top of that.
So if the tide rises, you better be on a boat then.
That's right. Oh.
I wanted to talk with you about a house for older adults, the concept itself.
Yes.
I grew up in Germany, but also in Morocco. Both my parents are Moroccan. And from my perspective, or from how I was socialized, it's like you don't put older people somewhere. They have to be in your family. They have to be in your house. This is why this whole pandemic situation in some countries, it's so different.
Yes.
Can you maybe reflect on that? Did you have any ideas about what it means? Also, because you told us the story of your friend and of your father, you brought him back actually, so he can live in dignity. Can you maybe share your thoughts about this issue that is really, really important to me? I have a mom, she's older, what to do, I travel a lot, so it's like something that I think a lot about. So maybe, I don't know.
Oh, yes, I'd love to say something about that, Mohamed. So our culture really is about putting our old people away, right? We put them in a home. I mean, and that's a Western kind of truly Western concept. In generations before, in African-American communities, in the summertime, you'd go down south to stay with your auntie or your grandma. That's just what happened if there were people down south. Or, in my case, I went to sometimes to North Carolina and often to Philadelphia because my pop had a sister in Philadelphia, so we would go there. But the family was shared, so it was always an extended family. At some point, meeting in the middle. My grandmother would be there. So there were always generations of family in one house. But in the recent times, and I cared for my father's wife, my stepmother, for over, she died a couple of years ago, and he died in 2010. And so she had been living with my wife and I for that whole time. And before that, we cared for both of them in their home because they wanted to age in place. And one of the things I advocate for is that one should be allowed to age in place until you cannot. So I'm also co-founder and chair of a concept called the Villages of the Brooklyn Village, which is the place where I live, the area in which I live. That the village provides a space where people can age in place, older people, and there are supports for you to do that if you don't have young people, your kids, to care for you. And so this brings us back like full circle, because LGBTQ SGL elders often did not have kids. And who am I saying took care of my dad? Me. So if you're an elder who didn't have kids, then why would you have kids? Right? Even now, there's some places where you can't adopt kids, where you can't be a two-parent family. So the laws have been restrictive in terms of LGBTQ SGL people building families. All right, so that's the whole concept. So they're most likely to live alone. They're most likely not to have kids. So who cares for them? This chosen family, Mohamed, that you referred to. And that's what my friend was talking about during the AIDS epidemic. You all may know that, professionals did not want to care for AIDS people during the first years. No one really knew what was going on, sort of with this pandemic now. And thought you could get it by touching somebody. Nobody wanted to touch. Nobody wanted to. So people, gay men and lesbians came together lesbians to take care of the gay men. So the families of choice, that whole concept of families of choice was really solidified.
This is why it's so important to talk also to the mainstream about the concept of chosen family, I think, because at least here in Germany and in Berlin, we had the discussion during the pandemic, who can visit whom, actually. And there was this discussion that you can only visit your family members, but it has to be your sister, or it has to be your father, or actually your kids. And a lot of queer people in Berlin responded like, I have a family, but I'm not related to them, like as you think, as the state would define the family. So This is why also for me, it's so important to just spread the word and explain what chosen family means.
Right. And get those documents, right? I mean, because we did that whole thing here in the US. And it was exacerbated by the Trump administration, trying to go back. But President Barack Obama and President Bill Clinton both enabled legislation so that you could, gay folks, the wife husband could visit the wife husband in the hospital, that you cannot deny them services because they are not presenting like you think they ought to present. So hooray for Germany.
No, I can only agree to what Mohamed just said about how the pandemic is actually strengthening and reinstating specific dominant ideas, which they are dominant, they're not realistic, about how a classic family works. In Berlin is the city of singles. Berlin is the city of patchwork families. I have a fairly big circle of friends, which I'm very happy to have. All of them except one or two are coming from families that split up and reformed, so-called patchwork families. So talking about only having one other household or one other family member in place would already kind of go way beyond that reality of a patchwork family, which isn't even in LGBTQI plus or SGL situation most of the cases.
Right.
So in a way, you have this very weird and implicit reinstallment of monogamy, and also of the idea of staying in one place, of Christianity as everybody locking down for Christmas, which obviously not everybody is celebrating Christmas.
Yes, absolutely.
Mohammed and I, so you find this re-strengthening of conservative structures and ideas by just falling back onto something the ruling party, I think, assumes to be common sense and the same for everyone. And this obviously goes against an idea of what radical diversity would try to do. Yeah. So maybe I'd be interested in your thoughts on how maybe the pandemic now, especially under Trump for sure, has affected the work you are doing, and what kind of counter strategies you have been proposing or finding in your work.
Wow. Okay. I just want to say a little word about those dominant culture that's mostly Christian and blah blah. We work at that concept all the time. We've just had a Jewish rabbi actually join our board, and so Sabbath is on Saturday, and that's when we have our board meetings.
Board, you mean?
I'm sorry.
The board you mean is the community churches board?
The board of Mary's House. Sorry.
Of Mary's House. Okay.
Yes,
sorry.
I'm sorry. Mary's House Board of Directors meets on Saturday, and we have a recent board member who is Jewish, and her Sabbath is Saturday. So how do we make that accommodation? We didn't even have to look at it because it was the dominant fall down. But now, because of the wonderful people we have around the table, we're going to work something out. We can't all have Sabbath on Sunday when some people celebrate it on Saturday. What? So anyway, so I just wanted to touch that a moment. The Trump administration gave me stress, y'all. I was just stressed out, right? Especially when they said, when government municipalities were saying, "Oh, let the old people take one for the team." What the heck? What does that mean? So I don't get services. There's some ethical things happening now, ethical issues that some organizations here in the legal organizations are fighting about the way PPE will be distributed. You know, you need a 65 or 70-year-old needs a I can't think of the thing. I want to say breathalyzer, but that's not what I mean. The machine that you need to keep you breathing. I can't remember what that is. So you need it, and a
ventilator.
Thank you, a ventilator. So you need an older person needs it, and a 25-year-old person needs it. And they're making some of the criteria is, well, if you're old, you've lived your life, and if you're young, you have much life to live. So how do you do that? How can you do that? So that was scary. That older people couldn't get visitors. And we just talked about social isolation. You know, it's worse. You know, it's social isolation can kill you. It's worse than a pack of cigarettes. They did some research, and smoking and social isolation are equal. So understand that. So people couldn't get visits. And so that was stressful. That was stressful in terms of, I'm not sick. I'm not going to the hospital, because if I go to the hospital, they may not treat me, right? Because I'm old, and they won't treat me. So folks are not going into the hospital if they want to see their doctor, they're not trying to go into there. So one of the strategies we've used is we've been promoting telehealth, so that you can see your doctor on the computer, which brings in another thing, because a lot of older people don't use the computer. Oh my God. But trying to make that happen. So doing advocacy around the state buying computers for older folks, and initiating ways to train them on the computers. Not just give the person the tool and they can't use it. And I don't know if it's like this in Germany, but some of our towers in the city don't work in that part of the city. So it's hard for you to get internet reception. We live in the United States, and I've heard of this in rural areas. I didn't know that it was happening in cities. So it's happening in rural areas and cities, wherein a person cannot get internet services. So that's part of our pivot in trying to make those things happen.
I can promise you this is also happening in Germany. Like, internet is horrible here.
It's horrible.
I just want to take 1 second, and then Mohamed, you can ask the next question, just to appreciate that we can talk about Trump administration in the past tense now.
Yeah.
I was just like every time I rejoice just to say, how did it go, and not how it's going now. Like, actually, when we started the series, it was still Trump administration. I'm so like, it always, like, even though still things are very difficult and all, but it takes a bit of a weight of my brain and heart. So Mohamed, move on, please.
Yeah, we can enjoy it a little bit. I'm on your side. I have like 3 quick points and then a question for you, Dr. Imani. First of all, Marcy Alboha asks if we will share the recording, and the answer is yes. There will be a recording and we will send a notification to everybody afterwards. Then the second point is if you have other questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A. And the third point is that I don't celebrate Christmas, but I welcome any gifts. And
you sound like my sister. But...
yeah, just give me gifts. I'm happy with them. But I wanted to talk with you, Dr. Emmanuel, ask you a question about radical diversity within the queer community. It's more about the question of coming out. I know that a lot of older LGBTQ, SGL identifying people, this is a very important issue for them because a lot of older, in abbreviation, queers, let me say it like this, they fought hard to not live in the closet. But when I talk to some younger queer people, for example, here in Berlin, they told me or they tell me that there is a pressure kind of to come out. There are like older people in the queer community asking them, and it happened here in Berlin, you have to go to your family and come out to be part of the chosen family, or to come and have, for example, access to our services. This is very difficult for a lot of people. A lot of people coming from very conservative families, for example, or background, or a lot of people who just are not ready yet or don't want to really talk about it. So how to deal with this issue of, is coming out the ultimate goal for a queer person, or how to deal with it also with all your experience in the field?
Oh, Mohamed, that's a wonderful thought. It brings me sadness. It brings me sadness to think about. When I was doing some research, I was talking to older people, older lesbians, and older gay males, Black. And there was this woman, a big dyke so a big lesbian, big dyke, right, who was out in the world at parties, just a big dyke. She was then, I think at that time she might have been 68, and she lived with her daughter. And so I went in, so I knew her, but she was part of my research. And so I said, so how are you doing? And what's going on? And she said, and I said, do you have a girlfriend? Or, just chatting. And she said, I don't do that stuff anymore. I live with my daughter. I don't do that anymore. And, I have to pick her up from school, and I'm not trying to embarrass her. And I live with my daughter. So she said, I live with my daughter 3 times, which was telling me all I really needed to know, right? Her daughter was homophobic. Her daughter didn't want gay people in the house. And her daughter was her family that was keeping her safe. So that was a really sad part. There's stories that people go back in the closet. And I say this often because it's so hard to be old with that ageism, and then to be gay with that oppression, and then you're old at the mercy of professionals, family. So that is such a hard thing to do, that many old LGBTQ, SGL people are going back into the closet because it's just too hard. So the epitome of coming out is, we come out every day. I came out today on this platform. I said, me and my wife. It felt safe for me to do that. But I have been in spaces, and I'm a big dyke too. I have been in spaces wherein I have to look around, spaces, political spaces that have Black people in them, or mainstream people in, that it didn't feel safe for me, even though it was being led perhaps by LGBTQ people. Can you imagine? So that's everywhere. How do you marry your intersex? And so it's a process. Everyone does it perhaps a little differently. The bottom line is, one, am I safe? And is it welcoming? And if you want to go further, is it affirming? And so those are different levels of me being out. Am I safe? Hi, I'm Dr. Imani and I'm a grandmother. So that just takes everything goes. I'm not gay, I'm not Black, I'm just a grandmother, right? And then there's the people, hi, I'm Dr. Imani, I'm a grandmother, and my wife is picking me up, right? And then there's the people, hi, I'm Imani, so glad to see you. Yeah, my wife and I, we had this fight and blah. So it's a whole different level of how safe are you to come out to whom? Lots of people won't come out to their doctor. Gay men told me they often don't come out to their doctor, their health professional, because once they say they're gay, they put them in a pocket that makes HIV, make them think that they have HIV or that whole setup. You're both shaking your head, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, this actually happens also. This is like not coming out to your doctor, for example, happens to a lot of younger people, which is like insane, because your doctor has to know about stuff to be able to give you advice, for example, for sexual health, for example. But this is like the sad truth of a lot of queer folks around the world. But Max, you wanted to say something.
I wanted to pick up on a thread that I feel that it has been kind of showing all through our discussion already, and it's the topic of generation and the series of generations following. And we talked about this with words like SGL on the one hand, pronouns on the other, certain habits. It reappeared with Mohammed's question on being pressured to come out for young people, but then again for elder people to go back into the closet, which I find a sad and very like interesting phenomenon to think about that. But also at the same time, we can actually by now look back at the different generations of a critique in feminism, first wave, second wave, queer feminism, which roughly intersects with generations. You have that with Jews in Germany, with Jewish generations ever since the Second World War, me being the third. You find that also with a queer movement, for example, gender queer movement, all that. So I'm just wondering, is there also within the projects you do, Mary's House, but also other ones, how does this intergenerational communication work? Or is there a bit of a separation going on? Because that's sometimes I feel like we repeat stuff because we don't really talk to each other. Almost, and then I read a text from 40 years ago and I feel like, wow, people had already been thinking about that. If I read the stuff Combahee River Collective was writing on identity politics, I'm like, this is amazing. Like, this is the same stuff we're facing today. It's not that different. Like, how could we not move beyond that? How depressing in a way. So and empowering at the same time, because it's not about, it's never about being more intelligent. It's just about being in a different context that makes it necessary to continue activism in a way. So Dr. Imani, I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this generation situation.
That is so funny. And so I'm going to add people of African descent, African Americans in that pot too, of, here we are way back here, and then and here we are again. That is just interesting to me. But I think each generation pushes the envelope more, even though they may not take the whole bucket of information. There's something. When I think about the civil rights era, with Dr. King and Stokely Carmichael and Huey Newton, those folks, Eldridge Cleaver, Angela Davis. It was a whole bunch of different things going on to try to get people to have their basic human rights, right? It was radical for people to even think that way. And now we have the Black Lives, and so So, and there were different factions, you know, turn your cheek, don't turn your cheek, pick up your gun by any means necessary. You know, the whole, and we need, and in my opinion, we need all of that to make a movement. We need all of that, and we need all our allies. I believe that one cannot, the people being oppressed need members of the oppressors to be part of their movement, to be allies. So in the case of LGBTQ SGL people, we need heterosexual allies, right? In the case of Black folks, we need non-Black allies. In case of women, we need men as allies. That whole thing. So so because we're one world where we need to support each other. So that's that. It's just so I think each generation takes a different kind of risk. And I think so when I look at the Black Lives Matter movement and I see the young people, they are taking a risk that, yes, we matter. They're taking a risk that's a little different than what is being coined. And I just learned this year, respectability politics. And Mary's House is doing a webinar on that. Respectability politics is like, I want to fit in. You know, gay people are just like you. We have children. Black people are just like you. We vote. So the respectability of the politics so that we can kind of fit in. And the Black Lives Movement is saying, you know, we are, see us. We don't have to, we don't have to be, we don't have to be blonde, tall, rich. We are, see us. We matter. So Max, I hope I answered your question.
If I may add if I may just connect it to a conversation I had recently with a friend talking about queer politics, what actually queerness means. And it's more than only identity. It's more than me saying, I love a man, for example. Queer politics, from my perspective, means like the deconstruction of norms. It means like anti-capitalism. I have to be a little bit cautious in the US, I think, to say that, but it means rebellion, actually. And it's not about, Katy Perry, I kissed a girl and I liked it. It's
although
fine.
I like that song.
Yeah, we go to the Dupont Circle next time when everything opens and we go and dance. But it's more than that. It's like queer politics is actually just always thinking of how to do it better and more inclusive. So I just wanted to add that. But again, Max wanted to say.
Yeah, I really feel like we're reaching a very a spot or a point that the radical diversity is pointing at, and I really like that, because I think the initial intuition that we had when we did the de-integration works in Gorky Theater was to say, and when we coined this term radical diversity with the Institute for Social Justice and Radical Diversity here in Germany, using a lot of US concepts for the work we were doing, and a lot of Jewish concept that had been transferred to the States before being retransferred to Germany, which I think is the basis also a bit for this discussion series, is that in a way we're trying to change the paradigm of being respectable to a dominant culture for minorities, which is still the way it works, right? You have in Germany the demand to assimilate, to what they call in Germany integrate, which I know in the States has a bit of a different ring, but in Germany to integrate means to assimilate, to kind of behave in a certain way, and to say, look, we are not accepting this claim anymore, not even implicitly, but rather we want to change the paradigm to a recognition of radical diversity being the basis of a pluralistic, self-defending democracy. And then suddenly what happens is that diversity changes from being the central problem of a democracy, as it's been treated in Germany until the present day, to being the basis of democracy. And then suddenly stuff starts to change, right? You don't need this And this is
Paradigm
what we're
shifts.
trying to
Yes.
say. We don't need to be respectable. The place we're at is already the place that Germany is at. This is the society we're talking about. We're not talking about adopting to your rules anymore and to
Right.
your culture, but to accept our position.
Exactly.
So that I just felt like we were getting to that point where
Yes.
a German discourse and the things you are describing is really kind of getting very close to what we're working on right now.
But then, if I might add something, and maybe Dr. Imani, you can share your thoughts. I am sometimes now wondering what's radical about this. To say it's Dr. Imani's thing to love her wife, and to respect Black people and to let them vote, for example. It's like it's nothing radical when we demand this. It's just we need to talk about how we can make the so-called dominant society and to understand that they need to respect this. Actually, it's like, it's maybe sometimes you need to go back to the basics and say love is love. But for me, I mean, love is love is so 2013. I mean, like, let's talk about, it's like it should be. I'm also a little bit like, we don't have so much time. There's a pandemic and the end of the world is near. So I want to talk about like how to achieve actually that each person, each of us can just live his day lives in peace. You know what I mean? It's like sometimes I feel like what's radical for a lot of people is not radical for me anymore.
I so agree, Mohammed. But you know what? You are on the fast track, my man. You are on the fast track because radical. So I'm on the track behind you. Okay. So
You're the conductor, actually, but
I'm on the track behind you as on talking about radical because the concepts of everybody should vote. But in this country, for more than 400 years, Black people were thought of as not even fully human, right? That year, just that length of time, that timeline to that folks are not where you are in your radicalness. How does it change? So I love that you're doing this because for me, this will help the change. But the insurrection on the Capitol on January 6th in Washington, D.C., where I live, told me that half of the country ain't there. They aren't even now on the train. At least I'm on the train, or, might not. But those people those centuries, those decades rather, of Black people are not equal, gay people are immoral, are embedded in the fabric of our countries. They're embedded in the fabric. So you have to pull that. We're talking threads here. We have to pull those, in my opinion, pull those threads. If you keep pulling a thread, that stuff will unwind. And so I think that's what's happening. It's happening with the Black Lives Matter. It's happening with radical diversity. We keep pulling those threads, and things have to unwind. And with the folks out in front saying this is 2013, pushing us and pulling us. I hope we get there before the end of the world, Mohammed.
Yeah, it's a bit of a race. There's questions coming in right now. I just wanted to illustrate maybe in like one image of like how I perceive this radicalness that I was just talking about. And that is, in Germany, you have a notion that after 45, Jews need to be protected. So you do have police in front of synagogues, and you have people kind of at least having the rhetorics of protecting Jews. And I feel like from a Jewish perspective of radical diversity, it'd be to say, look, it's not about having a society that is more secure for Jews, but having a different society. This is the only lesson you can actually learn from the 20th century. and the most important lesson would be that in order for Jews to live safely in this society, it needs to be a different society. You don't need like more police in front of a synagogue. It's not really going to change anything. So and then you have dominant society trying to offer you something, and I think radical diversity would also mean not to content yourself with something like gay marriage or Jewish protection, or you name it, women in the military, that kind of stuff, but rather to keep on pushing to a point when this society is being restructured in a way that protects everyone and not only a few people.
Everyone. That's the key word, right. Max.
No.
And then so maybe also
that is radical. I mean,
that is a radical notion that we all deserve protection.
Yeah.
Or that the radical notion is that we won't need protection because we are all part of this. I can't even get the words together, but we won't need protection because we are all a part of the society.
Yeah, and I just had a lot of conversations again in the past days about like language. We talked about language, and here in Germany, unfortunately, we have like over and over again, white people mostly saying, "Why can't I use this word anymore? Why can't I say the N-word anymore?" And I'm trying to then explain that yes, it's about the word, but it's about protection actually, because this word actually took all the human from human beings.
Right.
And in Germany, the Nazis, they used word and they put them on the bodies of people, yes. And then they sent them to concentration camps.
Yes.
So when we talk about actually using or not using some words, we are talking about the safety of a lot of minorities. But we have, as Max said, like some questions. If you want, we can take them, because there's one for Dr. Imani and one for Max. So I will like play the moderator here. There is the question about don't ask, don't tell for you, Dr. Imani. And the question is, do you think Bill Clinton's don't ask, don't tell was overall helpful, or was it a double-edged sword?
I think it was a double-edged sword, and I think it was helpful. There was nothing. You could get thrown out. So there was nothing. And so depending who your commanding officer was, it did what everything does. It boils down to the human factor. What that you might have a commanding officer that understood don't ask, don't tell, and believed in radical diversity. Or you could have had a Southern, and that's stereotyping, but you could have had a person who was a card-carrying KKK person, Ku Klux Klan person, and so your experience would have been different.
May I add something to this? I had, again, another conversation with someone from Iraq, a queer person, and that person was wondering why we in the Western Hemisphere countries talk about trans rights, for example, taking the situation of the US military in consideration, and talk about like trans rights in the US military, while the same military maybe also has a very complicated role in Iraq. So you know what like that person was a little bit puzzled why we celebrate, for example, the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the military, while from an intersectional perspective, we could also talk about the role of the American soldiers or NATO soldiers in the Middle East. So this is like for a lot of other queer people in other countries, it was interesting input for me just to understand their perspective that yeah, it's good that they have trans rights right now, but they're sending us drones, actually. The trans soldier is sending as a drone. So that was just like some input that I still need to, think about. There's a question for Max. Is there a backlash to the progress being made in Germany for embracing, implementing, fostering radical diversity?
Yes, for sure there is.
Yeah.
I think, but I'd like to maybe put this in a bit of a more complex field of coordinates than just having progressive politics and backlash, because that'd be how usually we think about that stuff, right? You have this one idea that is pushing things, and then people are, it's too quick for them. So you have this a bit along the lines of conservative progressive politics divide. And I feel like in Germany, it's a bit, maybe not only in Germany, but that's the place I know. It's more about having people even realize that the way they have been thinking about society and the way they have been reimagining themselves as being good Germans, as being non-anti-Semitic Germans, as being non-racist and all that kind of things, that those things have been based much more on wishful thinking than on actual changes in structure and political thought. And that, I think, is something that like we are working our asses off to get across as a message, to say, look, I know that from a German like perpetrator perspective and those families, the desire to be different is extremely strong, and I understand that. Obviously, if something happens like National Socialism and the Holocaust, what you want to do is be as far away from it as possible. But it's not enough to wish for that. It's not enough to want that. You also need to do stuff for that. And I think this is where it becomes painful. And this, I wouldn't call this a backlash. I would call this a almost cognitive divide of what you believe you are and what you actually are. And you can see that in the presence of right-wing politics in Germany, and the way it was able to gain strength within a very short time. You can see it with the presence of right terrorism and the like right violence that is happening, and the continuity that you see with the German public to just tell itself again and again that it's the good Germany that has nothing to do with that. And I think we're going in that, we're trying to destroy or to question or to destabilize this idea of the good Germany, because it's a prerequisite in order to actually talk about the presence and continuity of racism and the presence and continuity of anti-Semitism. And this provokes a lot of disappointment, sadness, negative feelings, all that kind of stuff. It's not really a backlash. It's rather lifting the veil, and then suddenly people feel like they're being exposed. I wouldn't really call it a backlash in that sense.
Lifting the veil, I mean, we talked about Trump, so that was lifting the veil and seeing the ugly. But maybe, Dr. Imani, from your perspective, a lot of people, they said, okay, Biden will fix it. But at the same time, people are storming buildings, government buildings, and the Capitol around the corner there in DC. So how do you, I don't want to call it backlash after Max
I know Max
said that it's not a
backlash either.
Yeah, it's not allowed anymore. But how would you describe it in the US? Because I mean, it's so much more complicated than only Donald Trump, actually. Also because some of his family members are trying to run for office. But how would you describe this situation?
I would describe it like Max described it, actually. That's what I really would do. Max, I'm going to try to not use backlash, because it really is exposing the underbelly of this that has been around for years and years. You know, I've been having conversations with folks, and we're saying that the storming of the Capitol was not in a vacuum. It surprised many people, but many people weren't surprised. Well, we were surprised that people didn't get shot, but the actual storming of it was not a surprise, because the people were wondering, where is their capital? Where's their capital that happened during Reconstruction? And Reconstruction happened right after the freeing of enslaved people, right? And then the South went through a Reconstruction period, and there were lots of Black folks not lots, but many Black folks in the Senate and Congress, right? But not enough to make any real changes. And then there's the Capitol with Jim Crow that came right after that Reconstruction, because we're not having you Black folk up in there. So then we have Jim Crow, and the voting privilege is being taken away. You got to pay the voting tax, you get beat, killed, whatever. And then, so there's that Capitol. And now we have a Capitol with AOC in it, a Capitol with Nancy Pelosi, a Capitol with people who think that we should be diverse and we should have all people. And these folks who were in the insurrection don't like that. And that's half of our country who are not buying into this radical diversity. So we're lifting that, because I think the other, at least a quarter of the other half of people had no idea that this underbelly even existed. I mean, they knew they had that drunk uncle or that quote backwards aunt, but their doctor and their lawyers and their politicians, they had no idea. So not backlash, but lifting that underbelly, lifting up to see that underbelly.
Well, great. Thank you so much for that. I mean, the whole point of this series also is to kind of put a German perspective in perspective with different US American, Mexican, Canadian perspectives. And I think we've really we've really gone a long way now in this discussion already, moving from the specifics of your work to points where we can combine, compare those things, and find points of intersection, and maybe where the struggle is similar or close. And it's one of those moments when I feel like I feel really a deep sadness we cannot meet in person, because I'd really love to kind of, I don't know, have a coffee now, or even
Yes.
it's too early for you to have a drink, but here, like, we could have a drink in Berlin at least.
It's after 1. We could have a Long Island iced tea. Come on now.
Wow, this is what you do at 1 in the States? It's one of the toughest. So I guess we're gonna probably, there's no more questions, so I feel like maybe we're moving towards the end to wrap this up. Is there anything else you would like to say, Dr. Imani or Mohamed, before I announce the next series that's gonna happen?
I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me. This has just been wonderful. I knew it was going to be after I looked at the other videos of the work that you've been doing. So I appreciate it, and I am honored to that you thought of me and invited me to speak. Just keep doing the work, right? Keep pulling up the underbelly, right? Keep writing, you guys. Keep doing what you do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Imani. I'm really inspired listening to your thoughts and really learning from your work. And I'm definitely passing by for that drink, actually. I hope as soon as possible, and I hope you are safe, of course, in this very difficult times. But it's just, it's just so much inspiration that community work that really keeps people alive, actually. And then all the thoughts that we shared today. So I'm looking forward to our next installment and saying thank you again, Dr. Imani, for your time.
Yes. Yeah, the honor is all on my side as well. I think, Mohamed, we'll need to do a drinking and talking tour, or maybe also a talking and drinking tour once the pandemic is over, and we're just going to go and visit North America and Central America and do that. That'd be amazing. So yes, let me just give you an idea how it's where we're gonna go from here. Like, this show is gonna be put up very soon online. You're gonna find it online. So you can rewatch that if you want, or even spread the news and send it to people that you find that may be interested in that. The next one is going to take place on March 10 with the Goethe-Institut San Francisco, and it's going to be at 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern time, And in Germany, it's going to be 10 p.m. at night, which is very late, but it's going to be worth it. Now I'm going to tell you why, because we're going to have Abby Abinandi with us, who is an enrolled member of the Yurok tribe. I hope I'm saying this right. Yurok tribe, and Chief Justice of the Yurok tribe since 2008. And before that, Abinandi served as a San Francisco Superior Court Commissioner for approximately 20 years as, and I quote, the first Native American woman to pass the California bar and the first Native American woman in California to become a state judge. And I must say, we haven't had that perspective within our talking series yet. So that's going to be yet another very interesting extension of the question of radical diversity and what that means. So really join us next time on March 10. And we're very much looking forward to seeing you again. And thank you to Goethe-Institut. Thank you to Heinrich Böll Stiftung, who's making this possible. Thanks to Thomas Mannhaus. Thanks to the Institute of Radical Diversity and Social Justice. And have a great day with or without the Long Island iced tea.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye.
Have a great bye-bye.